Three men were booked for the same chair on the same night in March of 1973, and the producer who booked them made 3 separate calls and told none of them about the other 2. He thought he was building a good segment. What he was actually building was a room that could only hold one kind of man by the end of the night, and it would not be the loudest one. You could have learned everything you needed to know about all 3 of them from the way they arrived, hours before a word was spoken on air. The first came in a black Lincoln that stopped under the entrance canopy and did not move for nearly 2 minutes while someone inside finished a phone call. When the door finally opened, an assistant stepped out first and held it, and then the guest emerged slowly. Charcoal suit, hair pulled back with a precision that required help, and paused at the top of the steps to scan the building as though waiting for it to recognize him. 6 people had come with him, all of them arranged around the one. Before his coat reached a hanger, he had asked for a different dressing room, a colder studio, and a later slot, because, he explained, he performed better when the room was already warm. The producer wrote 3 words in the margin of his clipboard: "Handle with care." The second arrived in a Ford pickup. He parked himself in the public lot. He walked in through the side entrance, shook the security guard's hand, and told the attendant who reached for his bag that he was fine. He had it. He asked for black coffee, found his room, and spent half an hour reading a paperback he had brought from home. Nobody wrote anything in any margin about him. The third arrived last by taxi, carrying 1 small bag. He paid the driver, added a fair tip, and thanked him by name because he had asked the man's name during the ride. At the security desk, the guard ran a finger down the list, found him, and smiled with something warmer than protocol. The guest paused before walking on and asked how long the guard had been doing this. 23 years, the man said. Then you have already seen everything worth seeing, the guest said, and thanked him for being there. He walked the long corridor alone. No manager, no assistant, no one to confirm he belonged. As he passed the largest dressing room, a burst of laughter came through the half-open door, and a voice inside said that by the end of the night, this town would remember exactly who belonged at the top. His pace did not change. He found his room, sat in the single chair, closed his eyes, and did not move for 17 minutes. If you want to know why the quietest man in that building was the most dangerous, stay with this, because he had already decided how the night would end, and he was in no hurry to explain it. Johnny Carson had been reading rooms for 2 decades, and within a minute of the 3 of them settling onto his couch, he felt something he did not have a name for. Not hostility exactly, something pressurized, something that had been building for weeks in phone calls and training floors and a restaurant booth where the first guest had said, loudly enough for 3 tables to hear, that one of the other 2 was a cowboy who had learned to kick and the other was choreography, beautiful choreography, but that you did not win real fights with choreography, you won them with damage. Those words had traveled the way such words travel, and now all 3 men were on one couch, and Carson could feel the couch was too small for what was on it. He opened the way he always did, warmly, and gave the man in the pickup truck plainness the first questions. That guest answered with economy, said the belt around his waist had never been the point, and the audience warmed to him because honesty always played. Then Carson turned carefully to the man who had arrived in the Lincoln and asked about the comments that had been circulating. The man smiled the wide, gracious smile that landed just short of gracious, and said he only ever spoke the truth, and that the truth was not always comfortable for men who had been handed the word legend without being tested for it. Then he leaned down the couch toward the third man, the quiet one, and asked the question he had clearly been carrying all night. He had seen the man's films, entertaining, genuinely, but had anyone ever actually tested him? Not on a set, not in a demonstration, in a real situation, with real consequences. The quiet man considered it with the patience of someone who had been asked smaller versions of that question his whole life. Every morning, he said, by himself, there was soft laughter. The first guest's smile held, and he said that was poetic, but poetry did not stop a punch. No, the quiet man agreed, but understanding does. and the first guest repeated the word understanding slowly, as if turning over something he had found unconvincing, and asked whether the man truly believed he could think his way through a real fight. The quiet man said that most fights were decided before the first contact, that they were decided here, and he touched his own temple once without drama, and said the man who lost that moment had already lost everything that came after. The room shifted. It was small, a lean forward, a change in the quality of the silence, but Carson felt it, and so did the first guest, which was the problem because the room was moving, and it was not moving toward him. He unfolded his arms and said, half a degree colder, that it was a very comfortable philosophy for a man who had never been tested by anyone worth the comparison. The studio went still, not quieter, still. And the quiet man looked at him without anger or defensiveness, the way a man looks at a door he has already decided he does not need to open, and said 4 words, "Nor have you." The audience made a sound, and Carson set down his cards, and the first guest stood up from the couch, not to leave, to prove something. He stood the way men stand when they have confused movement with power, straightened his jacket with one sharp pull, and turned first to the man from the pickup truck. "Stand up," he said, the way a director says action, just a demonstration, nothing serious. The word nothing was doing a great deal of work. The other man stood slowly, with the calm of someone who had been in enough real rooms to know the difference between a demonstration and a declaration, and faced him. And then, in less than 4 seconds, the first guest's hand shot forward and closed around the front of the other man's collar, not a training grip, a personal one, the kind that skips every formal boundary and arrives directly at the thing it means. He pulled him forward 2 inches and held him there. Here is the part worth staying for, because for one suspended second, the entire studio existed inside that grip. 3 people in the 4th row reached for each other without looking away. A cameraman tightened his shot on instinct. The stage director's hand found the emergency switch. Carson was already rising. Security had started moving from both wings, and from the far side of the stage came a voice that was not loud enough to fill the room, and somehow filled it completely. "Let go of him." Everything stopped. The first guest turned his head slowly, grip still in place, wearing the particular irritation of a man whose moment has been interrupted by someone he had not thought worth interrupting it. The quiet man was standing exactly where he had been sitting. He had not taken a stance. His hands were at his sides. His breathing had not changed. "This does not involve you," the first guest said. The quiet man took 1 step forward, only one. "It does now." And the grip released, not because the man chose to release it, but because something in that single step, the quietness of it, the complete absence of performance in it, had made holding on feel suddenly beside the point. The man from the pickup truck straightened his collar, said nothing, stepped back, and turned his full attention to the quiet man, because 30 years of instinct were telling him not to miss whatever came next. The first guest rolled his shoulders and looked at the quiet man the way a man looks at a problem he has decided to solve physically, because every other option feels beneath him. "Show me, then," he said. "Since you believe so much in understanding." The quiet man nodded once. "Try it on me," he said. He put out his own hand, palm open, an invitation. "Take my hand. If you want to see what a man looks like the instant a thing he was sure of comes apart, stay with this, because the next 10 seconds contained almost no movement at all, and no one who saw them ever described them the same way twice." The first guest took the hand with the smile still in place, the smile of a man who had never extended his hand and regretted it. He glanced toward the audience the way performers do when they want witnesses, and he got them, everyone. What none of them were prepared for was that there was almost nothing to see, no wind-up, no stance. The quiet man's fist traveled a distance shorter than the width of a hand, and the sound of it was not the sharp crack a fight crowd knows, and not the hollow thud of a movie. It was something denser and more final, the way thunder arrives after the lightning has already gone. The first guest's feet did not leave the floor dramatically, but they left it enough that 3 people in the front row saw daylight beneath his heels for one unmistakable fraction of a second. His whole body rocked backward in a single motion, and his free hand caught the back of the couch with a grip that had nothing composed about it, and the couch slid 2 inches across the polished floor. The microphone on the side table trembled, and the quiet man was standing exactly where he had been, jacket undisturbed, breathing like a man waiting for a bus. The first guest straightened slowly. He looked at his own hand first, then at the floor, then at the quiet man. His face passed through several versions of itself and arrived somewhere the audience had not seen on it all night, an honest, undecorated uncertainty. And the quiet man said, quietly, "That was 30%. No one applauded. They were not capable of it. They were sitting inside something they had no category for, and the human response to that is not noise, it is stillness." Carson sat down as though his legs had decided before he did. The man from the pickup truck exhaled once and did not take his eyes off the quiet man for the rest of the night. And then the first guest did the thing that made the night worth remembering, and it was not anything the quiet man had done. The smile was gone, and what replaced it was worth more than any expression he had worn all evening, because for the first time he was listening. He let go of the couch, stood on his own, and looked at the quiet man for a long moment. Then he said, loud enough for the couch and the first rows, but not for the show, that he had been wrong about him. Not wrong that he was fast, wrong about what the speed was. He said that if the man had chosen to hurt him, he would not be standing there. It cost him something to say it, and everyone close enough to hear could tell it cost him, and that was what made it land. The quiet man did not answer the way a man answers when he has won. He inclined his head, the smallest nod, and said only that the first guest had good hands, and that the difference between them was not talent. It was that one of them had spent his life preparing to be seen, and the other had spent it preparing to be ready. Then he turned toward the camera, because 11 million people were watching, and he said the only thing he had come to say. He said that for most of his life people had told him what he could not be, that his face was wrong, his accent was wrong, his country was wrong, that the hero was supposed to look like someone else. He said he had not come to win an argument. He had come because 11 million people deserved to hear one true thing before they slept, which was that no one gets to decide another person's ceiling, not a critic, not a studio, not a champion. Carson did not say much for the rest of the broadcast. The closing music played, the cameras faded, and the quiet man walked off the stage the same way he had walked on, alone and unhurried, carrying the one small bag. The next morning the phones in Hollywood started. The same executives who had spent 3 years explaining why the country was not ready suddenly and urgently ready themselves. He listened to every offer. He thanked every caller. Then he went to the gym, because some things had always mattered more to him than being believed. He had simply waited for the night everyone else finally understood it. Years later, the people who had been in that studio would argue about the details, how far the man's feet had really left the floor, whether the couch had moved 2 inches or 1, what exactly the quiet man had whispered before he stepped forward. But the ones close enough to hear the end always told that part the same way. The loudest man in the room had spent the whole night telling everyone who belonged at the top. The quiet one never said a word about it. He just put out his hand and let the loudest man find out for himself.